It looks like the waves are bigger today. So bigger waves mean we can get a better view of their action, their movement, their travel from out at sea to the shores here. And so this time I want to talk about waveforms. So waveforms in the waves, and this being another segment on music theory, geometry of music, and logic. So that wave height is higher than me, and I'm 6 feet, over 6 feet. I'm over 6 feet. So they're a good size today. I don't know if that's the big set, the medium set, definitely not the small set. It's been raining. Still a bit cloudy, but I saw sunshine, clear skies up in that direction, going that way. And the weather tends to move this way. So if it's all sunshine that way, that means that sunshine, that clear area is going to end up being what we see here. So there's no more clouds up in the clear area to travel this way. So once these travel out, we should have a clear view. But this is clear enough to get a view once we get out of the tropical jungle here and get right up on the edge of the cliff where it drops down to the water, and then have a better view. Oh yeah, bigger waves. I can tell by the beach, just the way the water is on the beach, the waves are bigger than yesterday. And I thought they were big yesterday. Seems today even bigger, so the trend has been an increase in the forces. The forces in the waves, the forces in the water. So what, the last 3 videos have been at this spot. I think last time I was talking about the scatter plot. The waves are bigger now, and it looks like the scatter plot area that I was focused on over there has changed. The distribution of rocks in it has changed, and when the waves have become big enough to do that, that's what you'll see. You'll see change in the distribution of rocks because the waves move things around. And so the waves are moving, the mass of water in motion, and the wave form is what the waves are about. That the mass in motion, the motion takes the pathway of waveforms. So waveforms is what I'm trying to talk about today. And sure, you can see how the waveform interfaces with the scatter plot over there, the scattering, and imprinted in the geometry of the scattering, whether you want to think of it as chaotic or a complex system order, there are geometric intricacies in the waveform. And as they transfer motion into the rocks and move them around, the geometric intricacies in the waveform imprint, probably fractal out, break up into the rocks, but imprint into how the rocks are redistributed. And with music, the sound of music is the travel of sound waves, the waveform of sounds. And you can get variations in waveforms. One day, the waves are smaller than this. Today, they're bigger. Who knows, maybe tomorrow they'll be even bigger. Eventually, one day in the course of time, it very well could be a tsunami wave out here. Not that we want that, but that's just a part of reality. Waves come in all shapes and sizes. So sound waves with music, you have all kinds of shapes and sizes of sound waves. And you can have a tone, which is basically a sound, but it's the package of the sound. And that packaging can vary. But you will be able to have a pitch arrangement to the tone, to the sound, and you can geometrically play around with the pitch arrangement to produce music. And typically the pitch content will be scaled like a spectrum, a continuum, from low to high. Now, the shape of the waves at the low end of the spectrum will be different from the shape of the waves at the high end of the spectrum. The low end of the spectrum can have waves that are longer, but lower down in how high they come up from the bottom. So these waves are bigger, which mean they'll be longer than the smaller waves, these ocean waves. These ocean waves are bigger than what I experienced a few days ago. And being bigger means they're longer from front to back and they're higher. Now, typically, the bigger they get, you have an even bigger increase in the distance between the front and the back. So the trough in between waves, this wave that just splashed and the next wave coming and the next wave behind it, there's a distance between them. And a regularity in the distance, a rough, even regularity between them, which allows that timing. You can count. So I like to count from the splash. Splash, a phase of movement. So that splashing phase will take longer. It will make things seem like longer, more sweeping movements. And it may seem like it's slower moving than the smaller waves, but not necessarily. It's so big that the whole body of it takes longer for that to cover an area, even when going at the same speed as a smaller wave. The smaller wave has less body to move across the area, so its movement, the movement of its full body, the smaller wave, will be done covering that area before the bigger body moving across the area is finished covering that area, because it just has more body to move, more water body in the wave. So it can give the illusion of moving slower. I compare it to watching airplanes. So an airplane may need to travel at 100, jets need to travel definitely over 100 knots. I don't know these days, now that they're using lighter materials. It depends on how heavy loaded the jet is also. But when you look at a big jumbo, like the biggest passenger jet out there, the A380, if you see it taking off or coming in for a landing, it looks like it's moving so slow in comparison to a 737 jet. The Airbus A380 coming in looks so slow in comparison to a 737 Boeing jet, which is smaller. And 737 would be the small of the jumbo jets, and A380 Airbus would be the biggest of the jumbo jets. And they could both be coming in at 130 knots. They could be making their approach at 160 knots, flying side by side. And as you see both of them passing stuff in the background, it'll appear as if the 737 is moving faster just going by the rate at which it passes things in the background, whereas the A380 takes longer before the full body of it passes the stuff in the background. And that gives the illusion of it moving slower. And so same thing out here with the bigger waves. The waves get even smaller. You can see little ripples on the wave. Those are wavelets, little waves on the big waves. And if you get close enough to those little waves on the big waves, you'll see even more ripples and going down and down and down in scale. So with sound waves, it's rippling through the atmosphere, rippling through the airwaves, and different shapes of waves, different sizes of waves. So the waves can be longer from front to back. They be higher on the low pitch, and the high pitch they'll be short waves. Some of them can have a good amount of height to them, but not be very wide from front to back. But they'll be overall, all those dimensions from top to bottom and front to back will be scaled down much smaller for the high pitch sounds, and they'll be scaled up much higher and much wider, at least much wider. Doesn't necessarily have to be much higher for the low pitch sounds. They'll be scaled up and down for the pitch up and the pitch down. The waveforms will be scaled up and down in size, if you could see them. So you can go online and see all kinds of good lessons, good lectures, good videos, documentaries about the science of waves, waveforms. You have sound waves. We're here looking at ocean waves, radio waves, television waves, microwaves, all kinds of waves. I'm here looking at waves in terms of mass in motion, and that the waveform is the pathway of motion that the mass is traveling. So mass, its motion, and the waveform being the pathway that the mass takes in the course of its motion. So you can get into the very small scale, going into quantum physics, and you'll get into aspects of quantum physics where they're still dealing with waves, waveforms, particles with waveforms, but they won't be able to detect or measure any mass, at least not by any physics known, a way to measure that there's mass. And so therefore, for them to say that there's mass, they can't. So they have to go with the idea that there is no mass, and yet they will be there registering waveform, or at least agreeing that there is a waveform there. Particle, not something. Maybe they're not calling it a particle at a certain scale, whatever they find. The terminology for quantum physics and particle physics, I'm not too good at all of that. I just have a general basic understanding, maybe a bit better than a basic understanding, enough to know that there's a point where mass starts to become a thing that's hard to detect or follow, and so to even say that it's there. But they will still say that there's motion and waveform. So at some point, the way I'm looking at things on this scale falls apart. But that does not mean that the way I'm looking at things on this scale is irrelevant. It applies. If you come here with the quantum physics logic and try to use it to work at this scale, you'll run into problems in the same way that if you take the logic that works perfectly well here and you take it down to the quantum physics level, you'll start to have problems at that quantum physics scale. So something about waveforms, independent of mass. So everything, energy, wherever, in terms of mass and motion, that works. But at a certain point, all of a sudden, the clinging to mass, the very substance of everything, that falls apart or is no longer traceable. You can't track it. You can't navigate by it. And yet, a course of motion will still be there. To say that there's a waveform, to me, maybe I'm wrong, but to me that's motion and its pathway, but no longer mass. Can we say at least matter, which is the matter behind mass anyway? Oh, these are some good size ones. So waveforms are very important. Oh yeah, this is a big one. I think this seems like the biggest one since I got here. I've been here 20 minutes or less. 20 minutes. I enjoy watching them. So waveforms, that's what this is. Even if you don't like the physics and looking at music in terms of waveforms, looking at it geometric and physics, you still enjoy rolling with the music, and it's based on waveforms. You come down here, you don't have to care a thing about waveforms, the geometry of it. You can just enjoy the water doing its thing, because at the core of our being, it's actually the same thing going on between music and here. It's just a different configuration of mass and motion. So I'm not going to go into quantum physics. I'm just bringing that up because you have to touch it. It's a very important thing. There's a lot of relevance to it, things being understood and discovered and made to happen in quantum physics are behind what's allowing this computer-based video and presentation, that the computer device uses quantum physics contributions to enhance the quality that we get in computer devices. Whether it's either way, it boils down to the processing, and processing with electricity, transistors processing electricity. And when you get down to the quantum level, you're down there where the activity related to the electrons, which is what's making the electricity happen. And when you're working with things and understanding things at that scale, you begin to have the understanding that allows applying it in more efficient ways. So better processing, which means better screen view, maybe better sound, just overall better computer experience. And it's also helping out with cellular biology. Things that you know from quantum physics apply to cellular biology, which helps people understand the energy system at the core of cells. And that's behind how cells operate. And that becomes a very important aspect of medicine. So if you've got medical problems, if I'm not feeling well because of medical problems, I could come down here to the beach and it'll make a difference in my day, but I'm just not going to have that really good experience that I like to have with the ocean water doing its thing, because my health is not so good. And then things learned about in quantum physics can help medical sciences in a way that allows medical sciences to help my health condition should I have an illness or something that needs, some kind of remedy. And then once I'm feeling better, I'll just come back down to the beach and be with this. So it's important, and at the core of everything is quantum physics. But the way I look at quantum physics is that everybody's rushing there. It's very rich, it's very promising down in the quantum realm, to the point that that's all you hear anymore. That, yeah, you're not a real physicist if you're not, in the rich and promising field of quantum physics, as if that's where everything's got to head, and that's where everything's going to be if you're ever going to make a significant breakthrough or contribution when it comes to physics. And to me, that's like saying, if you don't put your head in the smallest bucket of perspective of all things, then you're not going to see what matters. And that's very myopic, or at least sounds very myopic. But in physics, it's a little bit different than that, because you can put your head in the smallest bucket when it comes to physics, and physics breaks through and sees a whole universe inversely going down into the smaller and smaller scale, as endlessly and as infinitely as on the larger scale, looking out in the universe. And the things that you learn in that small and tiny bucket apply in the largest scale, farther out universe beyond. And so it's important to do that. But when people start to believe that that's the only place that matters anymore, because it applies to everywhere else, no matter how far out you go, things that you find at the smallest scale will apply at the largest scale. So just go to the smaller scale and forget the largest scale. But things are still happening at the largest scale. The ocean waves are still coming. If you want to go down into the smallest droplet of water and keep your focus in there, because you're going to find a whole universe of happenings much more intricate and dynamic than just these waves coming. That's not going to save you from the fact that big waves are still coming, and they can have an impact on you in a way that could probably wipe you out, such that you'll never do physics again, whether it be on the small scale or large scale. So a balance between both ends of the spectrum, the smallest scale to the largest scale, the middle way, is where it's at still when looking at physics, from the smallest scale to the largest scale. And music is navigating the middle way. Our bodies split down the middle, spread our functions across two sides, split down the middle, but intertwine as one. There's something to that, In the same way that electricity is split between two charges, magnetism intertwined with electricity, and magnetism split between two sides, South Pole, North Pole magnets. Electricity split between two sides, negative charge, positive charge. And when you're looking at physics itself, the ultra small scale, the quantum physics, and then the larger scale, modern physics versus classical physics, two sides coming from the old-fashioned to the modern. Is the old-fashioned irrelevant? That's like saying, because you have your head in the small scale and you can see a whole universe that applies to the universe at the large scale, that the large scale universe is irrelevant. Well, that's not a viable way of taking things, if you ask me. And so classical physics is still relevant, and quantum physics relevant too. All together, hand in hand, it's all one. The old-fashioned, its relevance is still there. It was based The old-fashioned was based on the same reality that we're living here in modern times. Ocean was rolling waves like this long before life ever came, long before there was mathematics or physics being worked at. And here we are today with mathematics and physics, and it's still here. And we're reading mathematics and physics into it. And it's this stuff that caused mathematics and physics to arise in our minds, not the other way around. Mathematics and physics isn't defining this stuff. It's this stuff that's defining what mathematics and physics are becoming in this world. Statistics, it's defining what statistics become in the world. It's defining what our biology becomes. This is Hawaii, and here in Hawaii is the life and story of the native Hawaiian people. And the native Hawaiian people, put in terms of music, this after all the geometry of music, the native Hawaiian hula dance, that's their dance, and with it they have their song, their rhythms. And so the hula dance, when you look at it, if you know the ways of the water, you'll see that the hula dance is definitely a dance form influenced by the movement of water. And the people of the hula dance are people of the water. And these are people that travel across the water, the Pacific Ocean, coming and going. Distances, thousands of miles on the water. And I don't know how many weeks or months those trips would take. But if you know anything about being on the water or in the water, you know that the movement of the water is always there. And even on the calmest days when the water is most calm, still there is movement on the water. So when you're on the water all day, all night, every day, every night, consecutive days, consecutive nights, on and on, for weeks or months, you can get seasick. And even if you get seasick, going off the ship isn't going to help you. You have to get off the journey, and the only way off the journey is to complete it. And even if you decide to turn back, you still have to complete the journey of turning back. So either way, you have to stay at sea until you've gone the course of what gets you to land. And the amount of time you spend at sea taking on the sea's motion, it becomes a part of your senses and your feel of your own body. And when you eventually spot land again, and you land and you get on the solid ground, you're standing on solid ground, and still your body feels the movement of the water. And if you try to keep your mind in the sense that you're standing on solid ground and there should be no motion, you're going to get dizzy and have a hard time standing up like a land-based person should. You're going to have a hard time walking straight like a land-based person should, or running. And so even if you decide to just sit down or lay down, you're going to have that feeling of motion overwhelming you. And yet, in some mysterious way, when you were on the water for all those days and all those nights, you were there in that motion. And you weren't feeling it in an overwhelming way as you are now that you're back on land, fresh back on land. While the motion was there, you attuned to it. Now you're back on land, that attunement to the motion isn't serving you. So now you have to attune back to being on land, but it takes some time. And so that motion feeling in your body, even though the ocean's motion is no longer there under you, that feeling of it in you is still there, and it takes some time to work itself out as you adjust or attune yourself back to being on land. So walking it off, you're a dizzy mess by it. How does walking it off keep you safe when you can stumble this way, stumble that way? Laying down or sitting down doesn't make it feel any better. So what if you take your body and put it back to motion, because that's what you're attuned to. So not necessarily going back to the water to have that motion back under you and feel right with the sense of that motion still in your body. No, you stay on land, but you move your body with the motion. And because there's a regularity of the water's motion, that feeling of the motion in you has that pattern of regularity imprinted into you. And when you begin to move your body with that motion that you're feeling in your body, which was the motion of the ocean before you landed on land, you move with it, the regularity of it, having that pace, starts to make it look like you're dancing to music. And because it feels like a waveform movement, you move your body in a waveform fashion. And so the Hawaiians were doing hand movements like this long before breakdance was doing that. Before modern breakdancers were doing that. The Hawaiians were doing that long before, because it was the way of the water. Long before there were people to do the dance of water. And not a dance for amusement. I mean, you can dance for amusement, multi-purpose everything. You can multi-purpose everything you want, the creativity of being human. But the primary purpose is very important survival and homeostasis type of adaptation to your environment and your activities in the environment. And that dancing conditions the body, not just for health in general. Dancing is good for your health, but dancing, the type of dance, the style of dance, can be for a particular environment and the movements of those environments, especially a moving environment. So the way you can dance on the rocks is not the same as the way you can dance on the sand. And the way you dance with rocks under your feet, rocks like that, and the way you dance with sand under your feet, like beach sand or desert sand, those movements of your feet are not going to work for you well when you're dancing on a hard concrete or wooden dance floor. There's geometry in the rocks. Your dance geometry has to interface with that in a way that supports your body for its well-being. And part of the well-being of your body is that you don't fall on rocks in a way that hurts you. And also on the sand, that you don't, fall over and get your face in the sand and your eyes and ears and mouth full of sand and all of that. So that you have relative coordination and function of your body for your well-being. So there's a system of movements for all kinds of things. When you get in the water, the system of movement for swimming is not the same as the system of movement for walking or running. So we have to be very creative in order to be in diverse environments. And being very creative goes hand in hand with being very intelligent, smarter. So you will find that When you live in diverse environments, diverse exposures, and you've adapted to thrive and survive there, you'll find that behind all that adaptation is creativity, intelligence, being smarter. And what intelligence and being smarter is, that's a whole other world of complexity. You can go into that in a very deep way, but geometry will be a part of it. So you can delve into it with the logic and geometry that we use to delve into music and the physics of all this. So you can look into waveforms if you want. Waveforms in physics such as microwaves, radio waves, just waveforms in general, everywhere, on every scale. And I won't go into the detail of that because that's not my specialty. Now, my specialty, I won't call it a specialty, just my interest and my concern. And it starts here on this scale with this very wave, the next one behind it, the next one behind it, and on every day since before life began, and every day afterwards, until the end of the very world that holds all this water in place. So it begins on this scale. If I go smaller, I go no smaller than all of this washing around here and the whitewash rippling patterns. All those rippling patterns, waves breaking up into smaller parts and pieces and moving in changing directions that intersect, interplay, all of that to become a complex dance of water. And you see the color change when that happens. There's wind, air moving the water and moving with the water. And so all that white stuff is where the air has been mixed in with the water. And so you get that white coloring with the air bubbles. Now it's not just air bubbles, there's life in the water, microscopic life. And so that creates also a texture in the water, which also adds into the frothiness here. That's a whole other complex system of biology going on in the water. So I won't go smaller than this scale here. But what I see is the large scale waves coming from the long distance. So this big one rising up, rising up, rising up just before it flashes. And behind it another one coming. They keep coming from the long distance out there. I feel the wind coming this way. The wind is steadily blowing towards me here. And sure enough, getting my focus back. Sure enough, the waves are coming from the direction of the wind, just like a wind being what's driving them in, and the wind is the big part of it. So the bigger waves are the long distance waves coming in. And then they hit. And then they create a pattern of being broken up into all kinds of smaller waves with all kinds of direction variations, different directions, 3 dimensions of directions. And so that becomes local stuff. Long distance waves come in. and create a local scene here. So here I track ground movements on a larger scale than even these ocean waves. Ground movements from the very tectonic plates under the ocean, ground movements from the local volcanic activity here. So we have ground movements that are specific to the volcanic activity here. The magma can have gases released and gases breaking through, exploding out under pressure, and they may explode underground from one area underground into another area underground and send shock waves through the ground, and we'll feel the ground move. Sometimes that magma under pressure with gases pressurized also will erupt out of the volcano, hopefully in its contained caldera, and we'll feel the ground move. That motion under the ground is transferred into the medium at the surface level of the ground, and we feel the motion. Now, exactly what caused it and where it's coming from, it's hard to say. You have to follow and study and do reasoning over years of just being with it. And so that's what I do, interest and concern in that. And what I've noticed is, just like here at the beach, there are long distance ground motions across the tectonic plates that travel from thousands of miles away. These waves can come from thousands of miles away. Tsunami waves can travel from 1,000 miles away across the ocean and reach here in Hawaii. So the tectonic plate ground motion waves travel across the ocean, but on the ocean floor, under the ocean floor even. And we can feel it here. And because of our volcanic volatility, now volatility can be rated, so our rating of volatility here is pretty low when it comes to what volcanoes can be around the world. We rest kind of smug in Hawaii around our volcano because we just don't know a history of the volcano exploding in a catastrophic way. The way in which it does erupt can be dangerous, but not in such a catastrophic, unmanageable way. So it erupts, and there's danger, but as far as volcanic volatility is concerned, use the word volatility here mildly. Not much volatility here, but still say volatility. So with our volcanic volatility here, relatively low volcanic volatility, we have our own local ground motions that are met by the larger scale, long distance ground motions. And I have to live with reading between local motions and long distance motions. And that's a bit confusing, but I've followed it enough to know that there is a relationship. And I've seen signs that I'm able to tell them apart, but not as consistently and confidently as I would like to. So I just have to keep trying, keep attempting, and letting my results be the source of my confidence that I've got it right. And it's a complex system because here you see those dynamics, long waves or long distance waves coming in, and when they meet the local extent of volatility, you see how it just breaks up and intersperses into a complexity. Yet in that complexity still exists the signature, the geometric patternization of the long distance waves. And if you know how, you can read that long distance wave pattern into that broken up mess. And at the same time, you feel the local stuff. Now, the other thing that happens is that sometimes there is no intrinsically local activity going on, that it is the long distance waves that come and agitate local activity. And so that would be no difference between local activity and long distance activity being found here. And so knowing when it's the case that it's all coming from long distance activity versus coming from just local activity, or the various mixing or combination arrangements that can exist between local and long distance forces meeting. There can be various configurations of how long distance and local activity mix. And there can even be various configurations of how strictly long distance motion comes and creates local activity. So that's something I'm working out. And when I come to the water's edge, I see the complex demonstration of the dynamics that I'm looking for. Reflecting here, I am reflecting at the water's edge. And the water itself coming in and reflecting itself off of the water's edge, splashing in and reflecting back out. System of reflections. We saw that in the music theory geometric and numerical models I drew with the middle way line of symmetry going through the models through and through. Oh, there's a wave with an odd direction. Everything's coming this way, and suddenly there's a wave out there that shifted this direction a bit. I think it was a surge, just an off surge, because everything else, oh no, there's another one coming in. Some kind of surge came in from somewhere, shifting the wave pattern. So when you have two different wave patterns come in, it can create jumbled current patterns. So if you're out there swimming, that's the swimmer's area. If you're out there swimming, you can have some strange movements of the water that can be confusing. You have to adjust your sense of what the water is doing, or get carried away by it. And it'll make the water much more turbulent. And that's what I'm seeing there. Yes, that's a swimmer there in it. A head bobbing up above water. You got to keep head above water to breathe, and that's what he's doing. And lots of turbulence at this particular point because of the wave pattern that came in. Anyway, reflecting by the water's edge, looking for little clues in the relationship between things going on, but ultimately being aware that the greater source of it all is from a longer distance. And there can be patterns imprinted upon the waves that we're seeing come this way, but those patterns have been imprinted from ground movements below the ocean. And that's typically earthquake happening and causing a tsunami. But on a more subtle scale, the subtle ground motions imprint upon the waves and make subtle changes to the waveforms that we see coming in. And so if you're able to track those subtle ground motions, you can see the rhythmic sync between the ground motions and the changes, subtle changes in the wave pattern behavior at the time that the ground motions occur. Or harmonically around the time that the ground motions occur. A harmonic relationship doesn't have to be that two things happen at the same time. It just has to be a geometric pattern of timing, a geometric pattern of spacing, a geometric pattern of distribution of mass, a geometric pattern of all kinds of parameters relating to each other. Parameters meaning a parameter can be the temperature of the water. A parameter can be how dense or heavy is the water. A parameter could be how aerated, how much air is in the water. And the parameter for aeration in the water can be harmonically related to the parameter for the density of a volume of water. Or at least the weight of a volume of water. Density is a bit more specific than weight, and a bit more specific than where air and water intersperse, in aerating water. So I'm not necessarily a physicist to the extent of having all those details sorted out, but I have a general overview. So all kinds of relationships between parts and pieces and functions around functions. A relationship between the water and the atmosphere. A relationship between the ground and the atmosphere. And a relationship between all three. And then a relationship with unseen aspects of it all, such as gravity. How do you weigh or measure gravity? That's a parameter of the whole complexity of everything. So my thing about tracking the ground movements and sorting out between long distance motions and local motions has to do with working out earthquake forecasting. It's there to be had to some extent. Already very good signs that it's there to be had to a useful extent, that the extent of forecasting that you can get out of it is useful. But is it as useful as we need it to be? Well, truth is we haven't even broken into it yet with what it needs. I haven't broken into it with instrumentation. I haven't seen evidence of instrumentation registering the ground motions that I follow and the ground motions from which I get the extent of earthquake forecasting that I do. So what happens when teams of people break into getting instruments that register the relevant ground motions for the method of earthquake forecasting that I do. Once that happens, that opens up a whole other wide, very wide approach. With the instruments readout, now all kinds of people with various other perspectives in the matter can jump on it. All the things about physics that I'm talking about, but I don't know the intricate details of physicists specializing in those particular aspects. Imagine those people from across the various fields having instrumentation readout for the ground motions that I work with for earthquake forecasting. Now, I see that as an acceleration point and an increase, significant increase in the usefulness that we can get out of forecasting, basically taking upward the reliability and usefulness of earthquake forecasting, pushing its accuracy upward and pushing the parameter or details, the details within the forecast. How many details about the phenomena that can be forecasted? You know, forecasting the magnitude and the direction from which it's coming, and pinpointing the location is where I'm behind. So pinpointing the location is the next step in forecasting the pinpoint location. That's the next step. Magnitude and direction seem to be easy. Magnitude seems to be the more steady staple, meaning I get that accurate most of all. Then direction, it wavers, but it's pretty good targeting. You don't necessarily need bullseye. But when you consider that earthquakes span a large area, so a 7.6 earthquake doesn't just hit the town that got most destroyed by it or got the most news coverage for its destruction, because the city had big news outlets based there. But it can affect an area of 100 miles. The big 9-point-something earthquakes, the largest earthquakes of all, they've tracked areas of ground deformation well over 1,000 miles. So the earthquake's reach. And so pinpointing it has wiggle room. If it's a very, very large earthquake, you could hit anywhere within 100 miles of its epicenter. And so the other thing is, the whole point of earthquake forecasting is that you respond ahead of time. And that's where the difference is made. The difference between being underneath the rubble after it happens or standing on top of the rubble after it happens to help the cleanup and get back on with life. The difference between having life after it happens or not being alive after it happens. So that's what forecasting is all about. But then you have a lot of resources in the emergency response according to what's forecasted. A lot of resources that need to be put there and put in place. But the resources to put in place over what could be anywhere within 100 mile radius, maybe 50-mile radius, even 25-mile radius, that's a really wide area. And by the time you spread limited resources over that radius, do you have the right resources in the right spot within that radius? If you look at earthquake aftermath, you'll find that maybe there was damage across an entire city, but you'll notice that some areas got it a whole lot worse. And some areas got it milder. So even if you do pinpoint it to a specific city that's going to be affected, where in the city is going to need it the most? So knowing more details, pinpointing as accurately as you can the location, and knowing details about how it's going to move, intensity of its movement, and so on, can give you an idea of what kind of damages to expect and how to prepare and shore your stocks up, your emergency response stocks up for the damages. And from what I've seen so far in my forecasting ability, I'm not just seeing what I'm able to apply and make at working forecasting to whatever extent that I have it. I actually see more going on that I don't know how to apply, but I know what application it would have should I be able to apply it. And that's things along the lines that we will be able to forecast when we move things forward in the direction that they need and get teams of people. It is destined to evolve into where you can forecast when it impacts, how it's going to disperse its energy in the location where it impacts, and how it reflects back out. Now, I'm not sure really how well earthquake wave, I'm not really good at telling earthquake wave dynamics as the earthquake hits. Does it do reflecting back and forth in the way water does? But when they're waves, that's just standard waveform dynamics. Now, things change a little bit in the medium, so when it's happening in water, it's a little bit different than when it's happening through solid rock. But there are some standards that you can latch onto, whether you're looking at water or solid land or whatever. So it's a lot of thinking. You could probably hear in the way that I'm speaking about it that there's some uncertainty. I'm not sure what to say in some aspects of it or how to put it. And that's a sign of a work in progress, and that's exactly what it is. And that's why after so many years doing very little talking about it, spend a lot of time just reflecting upon it and saving the space and time for myself to not have my focus diverted into so many things that when the ground motions happen, I can't predict when the pre-quake ground motions are going to happen. They come when they come for me. And so I can't have my focus split in all kinds of ways that all kinds of people in town do. Split my focus into doing this, doing that, being here, being there. So I have to spend time taking it easy, quiet, and not have my focus so distracted in all kinds of doings and happenings. And that way, when the subtle ground motions come, I can pick them up. I don't know how to tell when they're going to come, so I have to keep my time open as much as possible. And then when they come, I can read them. And if I have my focus open enough for them, I can pick up as much detail as needed to read into them well enough for the extent of forecasting that I've gotten out of them. And over the years of doing this is how I've increased my accuracy and details that I'm reading into the forecasts, reading out of the pre-quake movements and reading into the forecast I make about the quake that's going to follow. And so I know from experience that there's much more to learn from it all by just reading the patterns of the movements, the rippling of the ground, just like the water ripples and moves. Reading that and understanding the complex system so as to predict what's going to happen. And ultimately, it's about survival. Lives are on the line. It could be me, it could be anybody. Even if it's not me, if there's never another earthquake in our lifetime, we're still going to have children who have a future generation to live on Earth, and all of it will apply to them. So it has to be done for that, especially now that the big time clues that yes, it's not unpredictable act of God. We can still call it an act of God. All of reality, call it an act of God. When you get hit by a big enough disaster, you will have all the respect you need for people's belief in a God. Whether you choose to believe in God or not, you'll know respect for belief in God, even if it's someone else's belief in God and not yours. You'll know that when you experience a big enough disaster. And hopefully it's not one of those cosmic impacts of asteroids or comets hitting the Earth. Something like that, I just don't know. And don't care to have that experience, but it's a reality. All of this that we live in is a part of everything that goes on in the universe, which includes asteroids and comets out there. And sometimes they meet, their mass and their motion meets our earthly mass and motion here, and a great global catastrophic dance happens, and life has to find a way. So that's too big of a scale for me. This scale that I'm working on, global earthquake forecasting, is too big of a scale for me also. So it has to be a global affair. Figuring it out. As far as the music and dance of it, that's not too big of a thing for me. But the reality of earthquakes and tsunamis and all of that, that's too big of a thing for me. I'm just as vulnerable a human being as anyone else, and the difference is made in the knowledge and how we apply it. So I'm coming up with knowledge and understanding of it, and I share it openly. I don't know how to market and capitalize upon this kind of thing. This is global earthquakes. How do you walk into a devastated nation? Some nations are so small that should they be hit by a 9 point something earthquake, the entire nation would be devastated. And I don't find it humane or a symbol of humanity to be a corporation selling the knowledge of earthquake forecasting. I prefer to put it in the hands freely of emergency response. And typically it's not a profitable thing. If you look, you will see it's typically governments. Here, United States, we have federal emergency management, civil defense. Emergency response is all taxpayer funded. It's not some profit-making corporation that does what's needed when earthquakes happen. So I don't know disasters to be a thing of business. Now, businesses can come to aid, and there's nothing wrong with businesses being paid to help. You know, if government emergency response comes, they may not be equipped to do everything, but they can make payments from their taxpayer coffers to whoever does the job needed for getting things back together and helping people out. They can make payments to whoever provides what's needed. And even volunteers, people who volunteer regardless of payment, they still work within a field where funding is needed, for whatever. Even if they're not taking payment, there's certain things that will have to be provided, either donated or paid for by somebody. So who knows, I may end up in my field actually working, maybe involved with a company or organization. I don't have plans for it, but who knows if government ends up taking on the big deal of it. If my help is needed, it's what I do. So if my help is needed and no one is doing better than me, I'll do what I can, And if I end up in a paid position, I'm not against that. If I end up having to be a company providing services on a regular basis to make the powers that be feel like they've got a regular, steady collective in the whole global need where earthquakes are concerned, then it's what I do. So I have no personal plans or ambitions to pursue that. What I'm pursuing is exactly what's needed to have earthquake forecasting in the humanity bag of tricks. I know this world well enough to know that people everywhere are pursuing business, investment, pursuing money, and I hear it all the time. Oh, you should be making big money. Oh, what business you can make and all of that. And I see in the world so often people going into business and the focus is, I got to make a living, I got to make money. And I hear very little or insufficiently about exactly what it is they're doing. Making money, going into business. That is so general. It could be anything from genocide to saving humanity. So people make money doing harm. People make money doing benefit. So the focus on where you put your focus. If you've got your focus so much on making money, how much of your focus is on exactly what you're doing with your interface in the real world and your impact upon the real world and real lives, and your focus for delving deeper into the intricacies of a very complex reality. And you wonder why, with all the businesses, all the activity, all the busyness of people all over the world, working, doing what, and we see so many problems compounded upon problem, that getting out of the mess becomes in itself a very big business, which then diverts your focus away from the original proper goal that should have been in place before things went so wrong that such a big mess was made that now everybody's focus is on cleaning up the mess and possibly ending up going a step backwards as a humanity rather than forwards. So if you know you've got your focus in the right place and you see progress being made in the right way, I don't see any reason why put the focus anywhere else. And also, if something is so important, and so much depends on it in such a big way globally, you don't have to worry about money. And if it's the entire world that requires it, cannot do without it, and there's not a single person on the planet willing to contribute to it or willing to make themselves able to contribute to it. Maybe they don't have money to contribute, and then they're not willing to work a little extra to make money. Maybe they want to come on board and help, but then their idea is that, oh, I'm supposed to get paid. And I don't get paid, so I don't know how to take on people who are looking at it as something lucrative, a big thing, to come on board, because that's where to be. It's big. There's money to be made. I don't know how to involve that kind of approach to what I'm doing. It doesn't work for me doing it in and of myself with what I'm doing. So for it to work for me with a handful or hordes of people coming to me with the same approach, I don't see how that's going to work. So if there's not a single person on the planet who sees fit, to help out in the proper way, though there's not a single person in the world that I know that believes the world belongs to me and it's my responsibility, that the weight of the world with all of its mass and motion is mine. From what I see, most people are running around in the attitude and behaviors that signal the idea that the world is more so theirs, for all the benefits, all the ease of dependency upon what the world has to be a benefit in their lives, and doing that so much so that it excludes others. How many others? I don't know. The world of competition, just going into competition where a winner's going to take all and others are just going to be left out, and it'll be 1 against 99, and always 99 will be left out. So when it comes to the whole world, I don't see how the world belongs to one person, or how the responsibility for the entire world belongs to one person, and then the benefits from the world belong to everybody else. So if that's the humanity that presents itself to me, the idea that the world will just face doom seems like it was destined. And I don't even have to be religious to see it that way. And I don't know a religion in the world that doesn't also hold the idea that humanity has a responsibility as a whole, each and every person, and that the price to pay for anything otherwise is a catastrophic loss to humanity. That all the daily pleasures and self-gratification, according to what we think life is about, that we can get lost in those, and that there's a bigger picture waiting to churn up bigger challenges happening on such a larger scale that it takes a larger quantity of time to build up or to arrive. And we just hear about those things as stories and sometimes easily categorize them as myths and legends, and then redefine myths and legends as just fictions, fairy tales, which we redefine as fictions, until we're totally reconfigured in mind to be out of tune with what's really going on. And then being out of tune doesn't save you from having to face the music. And if you have to face the music, all good musicians will tell you that when it's time to face the music, you want to be in tune. If the music is what's going on, you're in tune with it. So tune up your instrument and play along with it. And I'm musical about it, and trying to keep myself in tune, tuning myself up as the instrument, and looking forward to the day that ground motion tracking is put in the hands or into the process of technological instruments, like how seismometers are used to pick up earthquakes, that maybe those are adjusted, or instruments, or a way is found to get them to pick up the more subtle ground motions, or maybe a whole different kind of instrument, or maybe other instruments that are being used for other things, and they have interference signals in them that are sort of canceled out to make their original purpose more easy to put to work. But then it may be found that those interference signals that they're canceling out could be the very signal that we're looking for, but those instruments aren't being applied in seismology. Those instruments aren't being applied in seismology. It could be lasers being used to track movements of on the atomic scale, and there's interference going on, or stuff being used to track space, outer space signals and movements and so on. And they pick up interferences that they can't quite define. And it could be that some of those interference signals are coming from Earth, and they very well could be the signals that I'm working with to use as information that forecast earthquakes. So I'm looking forward to the day when technological instruments pick up the ground motions, and everybody can work with the readout that comes from those instruments, just like we do with seismometers today. Who knows, a seismometer might be enough. Just find a way to get better resolution of the readout and start reading the really fine, subtle motions, and finding ways to not be confused between the earthquake-related ground motions and then other types of ground motions. I know doing it by the method that I do, I'm able to tell things apart and getting better at it. So there is a way for it to be done. It's just a matter of getting it into some technological instrument, some kind of contraption machine. And then the data that it gives can be put through a computer system that processes it according to a lot of the stuff that has to do with how earthquakes come about.